Welcome. No doubt you've heard that old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, I was thinking that you could say exactly the same about the road to heaven. Now, the difference between those two is that the road to hell is paved with the good intentions that were made but never carried out, whereas the road to heaven should be marked by good intentions about working out our own salvation and serving the Lord in faithfulness and obedience. The psalm we're looking at today is Psalm 101. And it's a short psalm, but it's marked by no less than 9 statements of resolution that King David, the psalmist, makes about what he will, or in one case, he will not do. Now, right from the beginning, we need to be somewhat careful as we seek to apply some of this psalm to our own lives. After all, David is in a unique position. He is the divinely appointed king of a theocratic nation. And there are things that lay within his power, and indeed were his direct responsibility, but therefore don't apply to us. So, for example, in verse 5, we don't have the power or the right to destroy those who secretly slander their neighbor. Or verse 8, we cannot and should not destroy all the wicked in the land or cut off all the evildoers from the house of the Lord. Now we need to understand what is the burden, the theme of this psalm. It's given to us in verse 1. David lays out his strategy, his plan, his manifesto, if you like, for governing the nation. And he vows that it will be one that is marked by steadfast love and justice. But there's still much in this psalm that we can take on board to shape our own lives. And I'm going to divide the psalm very simply into 2 sections. Verses 1 to 4, we have personal resolutions about personal integrity. And in verses 5 to 8, public resolutions about public integrity. So let's look mainly at verses 1 to 4. David's personal resolutions about personal integrity. And this first section reminds us of an immensely important truth. You see, although the burden of this psalm is that of a king resolving to rule righteously before God, David realizes that such a pursuit of national integrity must begin in his own heart and in his own life with personal integrity. Following his introductory statement in verse 1, in which he sets out his overall resolution, he makes 4 statements of intention about his own personal walk with God. Let me point them out to you. In verse 2, he says, I will ponder the way that is blameless. Now, the word pondering here means much, much more than just thinking about. It has the idea of attending to, of taking something very seriously. And of course, the blameless way, as the scriptures tell us, is the life lived in obedience to and in accordance with the word of God. As Psalm 119, for example, begins, blessed are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord. And then secondly, in verse 2, he says, I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. David is acknowledging that personal integrity, like charity, begins at home. What we are in public should be precisely what we are in private. The news is often littered with public figures who are revealed to be living double lives in that regard. And the tragedy is that those public figures often, all too often, include Christian and church leaders. David says, not for me. I will not be one of those. Then thirdly, in verse 3, he says, I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. You remember that Jesus taught that the eyes are the gateway to the heart. So David recognizes that in many, many ways, integrity of the heart begins with the eyes. If I could quote again from Psalm 119, this time verse 37. The psalmist prays, turn my eyes from looking at worthless things. In other words, turn my eyes away from the deceitfulness, perhaps of material accumulation and riches, from vain and empty things, and keep my eyes, the window into my heart, from becoming preoccupied with things that are meaningless and will not profit me anything. Now, it's important to stress that it's not merely wrong things that are in mind here, though they're not excluded. But the emphasis is on those things that are of no eternal consequence. Those things that may be good and legitimate in themselves and in their place, but yet they can become a danger and a distraction for the believer, because we become absorbed in these things instead of in those things which will build up our spirituality and cause us to grow in grace. And then lastly in verse 4, David says, I will know nothing of evil. David is determined not to allow any practice of sin and wickedness to find a lodging place in his heart. Friends, if only we had political, not to mention spiritual leaders who lived by those resolutions. But let me make one more point from the second section of the psalm, which, while it applies primarily to David as the king of Israel, also has helpful lessons for us. David is very aware of the importance of surrounding himself with like-minded people who will not influence him for evil. So in the second half of verse 5, he says he will not endure or put up with the proud and the arrogant. In verse 7, he says he won't entertain or have in his close circle of friends and contacts those who are liars. If I could quote another well-known saying, a man is known by the company he keeps. Well, it's equally true that a man or a woman is shaped by the company they keep. Friends, my intention today, and I hope it's yours as well, is to renew my intention to live a life before God, privately and publicly, that is based on the same principles that David vowed to his God. Lord bless you and keep you until next time.